All right, if you were here last week, you heard the story of Lisa and I changing the alternator in her old Dodge Neon. She wasn't here, so she didn't know I told that story, but
Boys or
yeah, the AutoZone, whatever, by the old place down there in Dobson. It was crazy. Several trips in the store asking for further advice. This was before YouTube, you know, when you could just we'd be out there with the video doing it, I assume. Well, we successfully changed an alternator. But I don't know that you would want to come to us if you needed to know how to change an alternator. I couldn't begin to guarantee you that I could teach you how to change an alternator. But one thing I can guarantee, that there are some basics that if you don't do them, you'll fail. If you try to change an alternator without opening the hood, you know, I can pretty much guarantee you're going to fail there. There's some things that are just absolutely essential. And if you overlook them, it's not going to work. Well, that's true of changing an alternator. I'm sure you can think of 50 other things. Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. It's true when we talk about our life as a Christian and growing and maturing in that life. Again, today and next week, we're looking at this passage in Ephesians. We've been in chapter 4 for a while, but it's so focused on spiritual growth. And when you talk about spiritual growth, actually it's part of just the overall category of personal growth and personal change. You know, there's things that everyone, whether they're a Christian or not, certainly needs to change. Maybe they're aware of that. They'd like to change. I tell you, I've become aware of how big of a focus this is. There are some people that, you know, have become known for being experts in personal growth. And they give tips on how to be more disciplined, how to be more productive and things. And it's great for anyone. There's no one that wouldn't benefit from that. You know, matter of fact, I've been seeing over and over, you know, some people who have some just wonderful insights into this. You know, one of them, maybe you've heard of Jim Rohn, but, you know, a quote that he has is, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And for a lot of people, that's a surprise. You know, if I want to get ahead, I work at doing better at my job. Like, no, you really need to focus on being better yourself. Again, getting that discipline, that effectiveness, and it's personal growth. Well, as the Bible talks about growth, it's an element of that. I need to grow personally as a Christian. There's some things that overlap. I need that same discipline and effectiveness. And there's some other areas that are more specifically Christian. But I would ask you, with that in mind, is there some way in your life that you recognize, or something is making you realize, I need to change this. I need to be more disciplined. I need to be more patient. Whatever it is there something in your life where you want to grow? And if so, have you been trying? Is it like been on your mind and you've been trying to grow in that area? And I guess I would ask you then, if you've been trying, is it working? Can you look and say, yes, I've made this progress, or is it a matter of I've known it, I've tried it, it's not any different really. Nothing has changed. Well, today, in the same way as the alternator, I won't guarantee you success today, but I will guarantee this, that if you don't take into account the things that we're going to see today, you will fail. These things are absolutely essential. Matter of fact, the main idea this morning is there's a biblical way to grow and change, and not following it guarantees failure. Definitely long term. You may make some little change for a while, but you will not truly change and grow if you don't follow these elements, if you're not aware of this progression we're going to look at today. Again, we're in Ephesians chapter 4, starting at verse 17. I'm reading from the English Standard Version. You have that handout there. Look at verse 17. Paul writes this. He says, "Now this I say and testify in the Lord." And what he's doing here, just to set this up, he's picking up from verse 1 of chapter 4. And you remember, there's a break between chapter 3 and chapter 4, although I mentioned last week, not near as sharp or distinct, or I think even the way people describe it is, you know, doctrine than practice. But there definitely is something. He says in verse 4, I want you to walk worthy of your calling. This calling into a relationship with God, we need to walk not to earn it, but worthy of having received it. Receive this forgiveness, this new life, this salvation. Walk worthy. And then he begins to talk about some specific traits. He still hasn't gotten to specific actions, and he won't till the end of this section. But he talks about some traits. They're all focused on unity. Well, then he goes off, no surprise. Paul goes off on a little bit of a tangent. He gives the basis for unity, and he starts to swing it back around as he talks about the way we need to mature and grow as a Christian and why it's important. Well, that's what he's doing now. Now this I say, as he gets back to this idea of growing and maturing and testifying the Lord. And I thought that was interesting. You know, Paul is already writing under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. He's already a spokesman for God, but he wants to emphasize. And really this section here is the heart of Ephesians. It's the heart of growing as a Christian. This is important. So he says, "Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do, in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them due to their hardness of heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to practice every kind of impurity. But this is not the way you learned Christ, assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus." Well, all this time that Paul has been talking to Christians, and even going back to chapters 1 through 3, and the verses we've seen in chapter 4 so far, he's not going to get to specifics until verse 25, where he's finally going to say, do this, don't do this. He's given some general traits. He's finally going to get to the specifics. But before he does, he's going to give 3 general steps that we're going to look at next week. But before he gets there, he's still setting things up. And basically what he's saying is, here's what not to do. Just to give you a general, and sometimes that's helpful, isn't it? You know, okay, if you want to succeed at this, don't do this. You know, don't ask Lisa and I for advice on changing your alternator if you want to succeed. You know, you learn the steps, but don't do that. Well, that's what he's saying. Don't walk as the Gentiles do. Well, in doing so, he tells why the Gentiles do what they do. And that's the most helpful part of this. And, you know, on the surface, okay, don't do what they do, fine. But why they do what they do, it's the same reason that we do what we do, or don't do what we don't do. And it gives us these elements, this progression of change and growth. And again, if we are not aware of these, if we don't take these into account, it guarantees our failure if we strive at all to change and grow. So what I want us to look at, before we go back to the verses to really dig in deeper, I want us to understand these elements, the biblical progression of change. And the other thing to realize, it's not just, okay, change from one thing to the other. It's also behavior in the sense of this explains why we're doing what we're doing. It's how to change from doing one thing to another, but it's also why am I doing what I'm doing? The Bible gives us a model, and it starts with the mind. Our mind, in the terms that the Bible talks about it, it's the seat of our understanding. It's the seat of our knowledge. It's the things that we have learned and we know, and it's the basis for belief. I know it, I understand this, so I've come to believe that this is true about whatever. Again, I have come to believe, don't ask Steve and Lisa how to change an alternator. That makes sense. Seems like the truth. Yeah, it is. You know, the illustration I like to use, because I think most of us can identify with this to some degree, you know, it's about being healthy. You know, I've come to believe that it's better, you know, to be in shape versus out of shape. I've come to read things that say, you know, if I'm not overweight, if I exercise, it will help me, you know, not have heart disease. It will help me have more energy. All these things, I've come to you know, think them, to know them, to understand a certain way about life. I believe that to be true. It's better to be in shape, to be at a certain weight for my, you know, body frame and to exercise. Okay. Well, that's my mind. It's what I know and understand about whatever, a specific situation or life in general. The next stage in this progression, the next element, is my heart. And when the Bible talks about our heart, it's talking about our fundamental desire. It's talking about our basic direction in life, what I want deep down when I'm really thinking clearly. And I contrast that with our immediate desires. There's sometimes things I have that at the moment I want it, but they go against what I really want deep down. And again, to use the weight and the health example, again, in my mind, I've become convinced I need to be a certain weight. I shouldn't be so many pounds over that. I need to be in a certain level of cardiovascular fitness, to be more healthy. Well, then my general direction in life is I want to pursue that. I want to do the things that lead to me being more healthy, because I want to be healthy. I want to have a better quality of life, maybe a longer life. That's what I want. I've come to believe these things, and so because of that, this is what I'm determined to do. I have that level, that basic foundational desire and direction. Well, then the third element in this progression is our will. That's the part of us that actually makes the moment-by-moment decisions, the choices, the actions, whatever it is. And you look at these, now does it mean that because I think a certain way, and because I've set a foundational basic direction, that I'm always going to make the choices that are in line with that? No. And weight and health is certainly an easy one to remember this. I've come to believe it is better if I'm a certain weight. My basic direction, that is what I'm headed for. That's what I truly want. And then I see that package of Oreos on the counter, and it shouldn't even be a package of Oreos if I should have made that decision back at the grocery store. But that's where my immediate desire comes in. And maybe it's the idea of, one's fine, the whole bag isn't, and most days I'm fine with one. But every once in a while, my immediate desire, it's been a bad day, I want a whole row of the Oreos. And I always want that. That's always my immediate desire. The thing is, what does my will choose? Does it go with that? Or does it go with that foundational desire? Well, it doesn't always do what my heart is set on and my mind knows is right. But I will say this. If my mind doesn't understand that I should be healthy and my heart doesn't have a general direction to want to be, there's nothing keeping me back from that whole row of Oreos. There's no reason not to. Because my immediate desire is I want them, they taste good, I like them. Well, if there's nothing else above that, if it's, in control, I'm going to do whatever it wants. So it doesn't guarantee if my mind believes a certain thing and my heart is set a certain direction, I'll always make the choices in line with that. But if I don't have those, there's a little chance. And that's really the key to what we're talking about here. If we don't know this biblical progression, it guarantees failure. It doesn't guarantee success if you do know it, but it guarantees failure if you don't. And when I say this is biblical, it is. There's verses that talk about this, and I want us to see some of those. And I would really like what we get from this is as we read the Bible, we begin to read it with these categories, these elements in mind. And so we see what it's talking about, how this progression is there. The one verse that comes to mind is Romans 12, verse 2. Paul, again, writes, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind." Again, mind, heart, and will. Well, look what he says. Do not be conformed to this world. What's conformed to this world? That's my actions. That's my choices. Don't act like the world, those who aren't surrendered to God. Don't make the choices they make. So he's talking about the will there. Do not be conformed. Don't let your will, the choices you make, be like the world's will. But be transformed. In other words, change your actions, change your choices by what? The renewal of your mind. That's where it starts. Now, he doesn't mention heart there. And not every passage mentions all three, but it starts in our mind. It's not going to get down to our will level if it doesn't start in our mind. And so he says there, be transformed, be changed by the renewal of your mind. That's where it starts. Romans 7:15. He says, this one's interesting. It shows the difference between our heart and our will. For I do not understand my own actions, in other words, the choices I make, the things I do, my will. For I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. Well, what's that mean? I do not do what I want. Yeah, I do. I want the Oreos, I grab them. But there's a part of me that doesn't want to eat that whole row of Oreos. I mean, you've been there, right? There's a part of me that doesn't, and there's a part of me that does. Well, what's the difference? My heart doesn't want to do certain things, Paul is saying. I don't do the things I want. My heart wants to obey God, doesn't want to sin, but there are times when I do the thing I don't want to do. Do there is a will word. Want is a heart word. Because I believe a certain thing, I want to live a certain way for God, but sometimes I don't. I don't do what I want. I make choices that are contrary to that. I do the very thing I hate. Hate would be sort of a mind word and a heart word. I've come to realize it's bad. I don't want it. I'm against it. So mind, heart. But again, I do the very thing. My will makes a choice contrary to what I know to be best and what I'm truly deep down committed to. And we've all been there, again, whether it's with weight or whether it's with sins. I truly know what's best, what's right and wrong. I want to do what's right. I don't want to do what's wrong deep down, but there's times when I do the thing I don't want to do. See how all those play into that? And then Romans 1:18, this one's important because it shows the cyclical relationship between our mind and our heart. It's not always just a progression. If I come to believe a certain thing, then absolutely my heart's going to be committed to it. Look what it says here in Romans 1:18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, so those are actions, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. All right, so suppress the truth. That's talking about the mind. The truth, that's something I believe or don't believe. And so you can tell it, suppress the truth. But how do you suppress the truth? It's saying they've come to see something, the truth, but they suppress it. How can that be if it starts with the mind? Well, the heart, again, there's a cyclical relationship, and we've all been here. Sometimes we hear something and we know it's true, but our heart doesn't want it to be true. There's this part of us, I'm not ready to give up my general direction. Maybe it is the health thing. I'm sure, and you see this sometimes with people. They've known for a long time eating a certain way and not exercising leads them to being unhealthy. But they don't change. Even though they know it in their mind, their general direction doesn't change until maybe you've seen this firsthand, someone has a heart attack. Then, okay, now I need to take that seriously. That stuff that I've heard, the stuff that I knew was true. Now I'm going to change my general direction in life. Not like the facts changed. It's not like they came to believe it more than they did, but their heart changed. I've got to commit to this. Well, you can do it just the other way too. Instead of your heart, your heart can say, I don't, just like it was before the heart attack for this person in that illustration, your heart can say, I don't care what's true, I don't want to change. And a lot of times we've maybe been here before becoming a Christian, or I've talked to you, some of you who've talked to other people who aren't Christians, and they'll come out in their moments of clarity and say, I just don't want to make the changes. Oh, yeah, okay, I've got no argument against it, I just don't want to do it. My mind knows it's true. My heart has suppressed the truth. And that's what Paul's talking about here about these people. They see the evidence there is a God. They see it's clear what he wants them to do. They suppress the truth. I'm not going to give in to it. Their heart doesn't change, and so their actions, their will, doesn't change. Mind, heart, and will. Again, if we don't understand these, it guarantees failure when it comes to changing and growing as a Christian. So with those in mind now, let's look back at this passage that Paul has given us here. Verse 17, now I say this, or this I say, and I testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do. Now why does he pick on the Gentiles? He's talking about non-Christians here, and non-Christian Gentiles lived very differently than non-Christian Jews. Non-Christian Jews, on the outside at least, lived a very moral life. And especially, Jesus saw the hypocrisy of the leaders, but, a true devoted Jew lived a very godly life. They avoided sexual immorality and, certainly idolatry. They lived a life. But Gentiles, no. Anything goes. As long as it wasn't against the law, and even there were lawbreakers then, but they had plenty that wasn't against the law that they could do that was so contrary to God. So what he's saying is, don't walk as the Gentiles, the non-Christian Gentiles do. You want this general idea of what not to do? There it is. Look at them. Don't do it. Don't walk as they do. Now, obviously, walk is metaphorical here. It's not just, move your feet. It's this idea of live. Don't act like they do. And then look what he says next. And this, again, would be a surprise if we didn't understand this progression here. Don't walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. But you just said walk, do. And it should be like the futility of their actions. The futility of their lifestyle. But Paul is saying, here's why they do what they do. Gentiles do the things they do because Gentiles think the way they think. Don't walk as they do in the futility of their minds. That's what's leading to the things they do. And he calls it futile. You know, that word means foolish, but it also means frustration. It has that idea of, I'm trying to accomplish something, but the way I'm going about it will never work. Futile. The futility of their thinking, to think that their life is really going to be better by doing the things they're doing, by believing what they're believing and committed to and doing it. Don't walk as they do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding. Still talking about their minds, their understanding, and he says they're darkened. Well, we're probably familiar with that terminology. You know, what do you say? You look at someone sometimes like, yeah, they're not too bright. What are you talking about? Yeah, they don't get it. They're understanding. They're not the sharpest person. You're like, well, they're saying their understanding is darkened. They don't think clearly about the world. Alienated from the life of God, in other words, a relationship with the true God, because of the ignorance that is in them. Now, ignorance means you don't know. This Greek word has an element of you refuse to know. And we certainly see that by how it follows up there. Due to, so everything he's saying, don't walk the way the Gentiles walk, in the futility of their minds, they're darkened in their understanding because of the ignorance. All of that is due to the hardness of their heart. They're doing the things they do because they think the way they think, but then you see this hardness of their heart. And so there's that cyclical element of, again, the truth is there. That, you know, they've seen in their minds how this lifestyle, what it leads to. You know, I couldn't help but thinking as I looked at this, and certainly one of the things that, you know, stood the Gentiles apart was their sexual immorality. When I was in Bible college, or right after when I graduated, we took a trip to Corinth, which is at the heart of, you know, this Greek Gentile way of thinking and acting. And in Corinth, they would offer sacrifices to the gods, and they would they would make like a little representation of what their prayer request was to their gods. You know, whatever sort of best pictured and symbolized their prayer request, they would make these. Well, they dug up in Corinth and they found a bunch of these little, you know, objects that symbolized, that portrayed their prayer requests. And they had them all up on the wall. So guess what we got to see in Corinth? They all had sexual disease. And so up on the wall we're seeing all of these clay figures. Basically they're saying, here's what I'm praying to my God for, heal me of this. And so just hundreds of them up on this wall. Like, okay, didn't someone, you know, begin to realize, hey, this isn't really a good idea the way we're living? You know, and certainly then praying to our gods to change things didn't change anything. Now, not that our culture is any better at that. We realize the same thing. But that's what I'm talking, the futility of your thinking. You keep thinking this way, that this is the best way to live life, even though you know it doesn't work. Why don't you change? Well, because of the hardness of your heart. I'm not going to change. I don't care that every bit of evidence says this isn't the way to live. I'm not going to. They have become callous. Again, an idea of their heart is just so hard, nothing is going to change it. No amount of truth. No amount of what they see or know or understand. And they have given themselves up to sensuality. That's the strongest Greek word for depravity, that word for sensuality there. And notice, they've given themselves up to. This isn't that, oh, you know, I know this is wrong and I really want to try to stop and I'm having trouble. They're like, no, I don't want to stop. I'm all in for sensuality. They have become greedy to practice every kind of impurity. You know, the idea is there's like a buffet, and they aren't going to stop until they've gotten one of everything in the buffet of depravity, of impurity. They're greedy. You know, greedy usually means I want, you know, money, or I'm not. They're greedy to do it at any cost. I don't care what the cost is. I want a little bit of every kind of impurity. That's where the Gentiles are. That's what Paul is saying. Don't be like them. Before I get to specifics, here's it. Just don't do what they do. And you see the extent of this. Again, it's not a group of people. The Jews weren't perfect. No one has ever been sinless. But Paul knows at least a non-Christian Jew is trying to live according to the law. These Gentiles didn't have that. And they refused any of the insight of the truth that was coming their way. This isn't the only time Paul talks about this. And again, I hope this helps us to see as we're reading through the Bible these elements. Look at Romans 1, 21 to 23. see the parallels here with this passage. He says, for although they, and he's talking again about non-Christian Jews, although they knew God, in other words, their mind, they had some evidence that there is a God and what he's like. They did not honor him as God. They didn't live it out, make the choices, or give thanks to him. But they became futile in their thinking. At the time he applies futile again to thinking. The things they were thinking, the way they were understanding, it didn't work. And their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. Idolatry. It was just the most foolish thing there could be, to make something and say, I'm going to worship this thing I made. This thing that I made is somehow greater than me. That makes no sense. Although you read that description, you read the other one. How much does that describe our culture today? You know, claiming to be wise, they became fools. You look at so many people who have all kinds of degrees after their name, and they've got all kinds of things they can rationalize it. It just makes no sense what they say. And again, there's elements of us. Whenever we choose against God, like, oh, we want to say we're so wise, it makes no sense. Don't walk as the Gentiles do. Again, we're in this passage and we're breaking it down as Paul talks about live out your calling, talks about the general traits and growing and maturing, and he's finally going to get to specifics. But he says, just let me start here. Don't walk as the Gentiles do. We can control that. We can keep from walking as they do. But what's, again, so interesting to me is we can't help walking for the same reason. That we may walk differently than they do, but however we walk, it's for the same reasons. It's because of what I believe and what I've committed to, and then I make choices in line with that. Or against it sometimes, but at least I know it's against what I truly want. And so we can't change if we're not aware of that progression. We can learn not just from don't do what they do, we need to learn from the whole process. Don't just the outcome, the choices they make. Don't think the way they think. Don't be committed the way they are. And even more importantly, as we're going to see, don't miss it. You know, the big problem today, and I'm not to the root problem yet, we're going to start with the big problem and get bigger. The big problem is not that we don't know how to change. You know, all of us, again, I think there's things in our life we'd like to change as people in general, and then even as Christians more specifically. There are things we would like to change. Okay? I didn't know if like the clubhouse had something.
It's an Amber Alert.
All right. There we go. Good that it's on your phone. I was hoping it wasn't some tornado warning or something. Yeah, back in Indiana, that'd be like, okay, get under your desks. The big problem is not that we don't know how to change, it's that we think we know, but what we think we know is wrong. You see the big difference there? It's not that I've got no clue how to change. It's like, oh, I know how to change, but I don't know that what I know is wrong. I don't know what I don't know. You know we have a problem. We know we have something that needs changing, but we don't know our real problem is not knowing what our real problem is. My problem's not that I get angry. My problem was for so long that I thought the way to not get angry was to try, don't get angry. You know, just to control my will. That's the real problem. The real problem is not whatever problem needs changing. It's our approach to change. And again, it's the fact that we focus on our will so often. It's just, I need to not get angry. I need to be more patient. I need to, whatever it is, fill in the blank. And we just focus there. And we forget about our mind and our heart. That's us. That's our culture. That's the real problem. There's a biblical way that for growing and changing, and not following it guarantees failure. And I'm guessing you've been there like me. If you just focus on stop doing this or start doing this, it doesn't work long term. It doesn't. Even, I hear stories sometimes of someone, they just quit smoking right away. Well, why? Because something happened. Lisa tells a story about her dad. He had to run across base. He couldn't make it. He quit smoking. An action of the will. But why? Because he came to understand, I'm not able to do this, and his heart said, I want to be able to do this, so he stopped. So even the things that, a person makes that willful choice, whether they realize it or not, it only happens if the mind and the heart are involved. And if we're trying to change without that, again, it guarantees failure. The mind, the heart, and the will, it's an essential progression. And it's not just linear either. It's not like they're all like mind, heart, and will. It was interesting as I looked at this verse, Again, look at it. He says, you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. Obviously, that's talking about the mind. They are darkened in their understanding. That's a mind concept. Alienated from the life of God because of the ignorance, mind, that is in them. So 3 minds, due to the hardness of their heart, 1 heart. They have become callous in their heart, so that's 2. They have given themselves up, that's their basic direction, their heart, to sensuality. So 3 minds, 3 hearts, sensuality, the things they do, that's their will. Greedy to practice every kind of impurity, practice, that's their will. And so I realize it's a limited sample, but in that little section there, 3 times he talks about the mind, 3 times he talks about the will, and twice he talks about the heart, twice he talks about the will. It's like you've got to get the foundation first. The mind and the heart are foundational. The will results from that. Does it always result from that? No, but if it's not there, it will never happen. And there is that cycle between, sometimes I can know it, but I don't really want it. I don't like it. Yeah, but you've got to get those figured out if you have any chance. The will does follow from those. Not perfectly, but it does follow. Now, I realize that it's a small sample, but think about the whole book of Ephesians shows it to be true. It shows the focus on these other things, of what we need to understand and the direction our heart should be. Other books show it. Romans talks about, how much time it spends cultivating, the soil for change, and then how little relatively of, okay, here's what to do to change. But it's because it doesn't matter if you know what to do or what not to do if you don't know this other stuff about what I should think in my direction in life. And speaking of that, even more, when we talk about our mind and our heart as Christians, it's not just specifics. It's not just, I come to understand lying is wrong, my mind. In my heart, I make a basic commitment, I'm not going to lie. And so I try, choice by choice, my will, not to lie when I'm faced with those choices. It's not just those specifics. Our mind and our heart starts with this foundational truth. In my mind, I come to understand and believe there is a God. God created me, all of us, to have a relationship. Me and all of us broke that relationship through our sin. As we saw in Ephesians, through our repeated spiritual suicide, God refused to give up on that relationship, so much so that He sent His own Son to die for us, and He offers the restoration of that relationship freely to us through His grace by our faith. That's where our mind really starts. And when I know that and believe that in my mind, that should change my heart, my basic general direction in life. Matter of fact, that's part of becoming a Christian. You believe and you repent. Based upon what you believe, you repent. You turn your general direction from walking for myself to walking for God. My mind changes, my heart changes, and out of that, my will changes. So it's not just I come to believe lying's wrong, and okay, I'm not going to lie. I come to believe and know there's a God who loves me so much despite myself. I want to live for Him. I don't want to live for me anymore. I want to live for Him down deep. And when I'm faced with moment-by-moment choices, is there still part of me that wants to live for me? Absolutely. We're going to see that next week. It's called the old self. But I've got to know this. I've got to know my mind has to change for my heart to change to have any chance. And that's why Paul, before he even gets to these specifics in verse 25 of chapter 4, he's laid all this groundwork. It's important to do this. This gives us our why. It's not just how. This is the why. And you think about some of these other things. Again, I can know it's okay to be healthy. I can set a general direction maybe, but it's the why. It's the person who has the heart attack and is about to die. That's his why. He looks at his wife and his kids. I don't want to leave them. That's his why. I've known all along it wasn't healthy. I just refuse to. The why is what really changes us.